Welcome to Good Thinking Live. Welcome people streaming live from LinkedIn Live and from YouTube Live. For those of you new to the show, here's the deal. This is our half hour each week, mostly Mondays, 9 a.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, where we show up together, a bunch of people who want to take a little bit of time away from all the time they spend on what to think so we can devote more time to thinking about our thinking or improving how we think. So streaming live from YouTube at Becky Saltzman, you can subscribe and hit that bell for notifications, or just show up right here on LinkedIn Live. If you follow, then you get a notification, I think. Anyway, today I'm very excited about this topic. And I'm really excited because I think humor has such we're going to talk about humor. We're going to talk about laughter. And as I started to say, humor has such a cultural twist because depending on where you're from, it really impacts what you think is funny. So welcome. Let me know who's here and where you're from. Barkley joining from DC, and Michael laughing it up in Toronto. Okay, so my question is, do you think there's a massive difference between what we find funny in the US and what you find funny in Canada? And then as you are coming on the show, tell us who you are and where you're from, and whether you think that what I find funny in the US might be very different than what you find funny from wherever you come. All right. So after considering April Fools and all these April Fools pranks, and then the Academy Awards ceremony that called into question the meaning of laughter and humor, I thought it would be fun to tackle laughter and humor from a good thinking standpoint. So as you're letting us know who you are and where you're from, here's the first question. And remember, participation. We get rubber chickens. And why rubber chickens? Humor, fun, whatever. We love it. Rubber chickens. I love the rubber chickens. Should we have bigger ones? I always wonder. I like these little ones. All right, here's the first question. Which behavior do you think is easier to control? True laughter or true crying? Which behavior? So do you think true laughter is easier to control or true crying is easier to control? Which one? And as you think and share your answers in the chat, I'm going to say hi to Stephen. Greetings from the home of the largest volunteer community emergency response team in the United States. Is that true? Oh, that's cool. That's cool. How many of you know where your emergency response team contact information is where you are, depending on whether you have one? All right. Laughter or crying? What's easier to control? Hi from Hoboken, New Jersey, but living in Alabama. Woo! Fantastic. Welcome, Matthew. John, senses of humor are different around the world, but tickling is universal. Tickling is universal. So can you tickle yourself? We're going to get into tickling if we have time. I left that as kind of a third option because some of the research about laughter and humor means that, and I'm kind of giving away the punchline, means that we should probably cut ourselves a little more slack when we laugh at something that someone else deems not funny, etc. And I'll explain in a minute. A little more slack. Ray says crying is easier, guessing. Maybe it's just practice. Okay. True crying is easier to control. True laughter, Alexis says, is easier to control. Welcome, Alexis. Okay. Is easier to control. Crying is easier. So John says crying is easier. Matthew says laughing is easier. It's very interesting. So this is good because I don't think people are agreeing on what's easier to control, which may lead to the fact that true laughter and true crying have similar regions of the brain, which may give you a little hint as to the punchline. So I guess it depends on the personality. Hesham says, I guess it depends on the personality, and maybe it does. But the research around this is very interesting. So researchers have studied people across cultures and continents to see if most people are able to distinguish between a real laugh and a fake laugh. But here's where I think the research falls a little bit short. Because when you see the results, I don't think that the definition of a fake laugh is exactly right. The definition of a real laugh is definitely right. But the research found that people can easily determine the difference between a fake laugh and a real laugh. But I was like, what is a fake laugh? All right. So, what is a fake laugh? In this definition, it's a different kind of laugh. It's kind of a chuckle. And I want to distinguish today between a chuckle, it could be a really good laugh, and a laugh. Because I think that the difference between something you can control, and this is supported in the research, and something you can't control hides a clue to how we might move forward in this world where things can be offensive and you think it's funny and I don't think it's funny. And how do I know? All right, this is because this isn't what to think, this is how to think, right? So let me say, Jeff, depends on where you are. Okay, i.e., shul or church or synagogue or temple. Absolutely. Brenda says laughing is easier to control. Well, not for me. Hint, not for me. All right. So researchers have found that this real, they call it real, that spontaneous laughter, the kind of laughter that I have struggled my whole life to control, and I'll share that I got in a lot of trouble growing up for laughing at inappropriate times in school with a teacher, that kind of thing. But now I feel a little bit justified because researchers have found out that spontaneous laughter has certain identifying qualities that we can kind of inherently it doesn't make us even any less mad when someone laughs and we don't want them to, but we can determine those identifiable qualities. During spontaneous laughter, the emotional vocal system produces qualities and signal arousal, higher pitch and volume, as well as faster bursts of non-articulate sound and non-tonal noise. These sounds carry subtle clues that laughter is what they call authentic. But what I would like to suggest is that there are these two different kinds of laughter, and we should think of them differently. One, we find this non-volitional, you can't control it, the kind that I always say, oh, gosh, I wish I had more control over it, even to this day, where it seems to be triggering closer in the brain to where crying comes from or other emotions come from. And the other kind, where we might laugh because we see someone laughing, or we're at a comedy show, or we want to be included, or you want to signal, oh, that's funny, or you like that person. That is more innervated, or more seems to be more correlated with activity in the speech portion of our brain. So we're trying to communicate in one case and we're just emoting in another. So when you think of those two types of laughter throughout today's conversation, I think you can start to understand our response to what should be and shouldn't be funny with less judgment and more metacognition, more how to think. Servan, hi from Istanbul. Okay, so what do you think, Servan, do you think it's easier to control laughter or crying? Curious. All right. So with our speech system, you can make a lot of different noises, so including crying or laughter or a pain shriek. And that's where the volitional laughter comes in. Fake laughter, which they call volitional laughter, I'm going to call it a chuckle, sounds more like speech. And real laughter is not going to sound like speech. So just that kind of laughter. I'll give you an example. I mean, I can give you so many examples. How many of you have an example, or you can think in your mind a time where you did not want to laugh, but you absolutely could not control it? You tried to pinch yourself, tried to think of something sad, and still you could not prevent laughing. I can think of so many times. My husband and I were almost kicked out of our birthing class back 100 years ago when I was pregnant, because there were so many funny things that were going on and so many kinds of different questions and that we just could not help, probably mostly me. And that was a hint, because laughter is contagious. So once when I was in college, I saw from the back, I saw these people laughing they were I could see that their shoulders were going up and down. And I saw one person in front of me and their shoulders were going up and down, as signifying that they were trying not to laugh, or they were laughing. Your body, you're just holding that energy in. You don't do that when you're ha, 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 ha. That's the kind of laughter that is not volitional, not under your control. And I saw the person in front of me doing that. Then I saw the person next to them doing that. Then I saw that the person next to them doing that. And that's when I looked up and saw that the professor who was teaching anthropology, physical anthropology, who kind of was wearing this whole brown outfit, what a bushy beard, had his zipper undone and was lecturing in a way that made it impossible not to laugh for me. So that was the kind of laughter where I just felt this pent up shake, shake, shake. It's happened many times until there's something where you're allowed to laugh and you comic relief and everyone laughs. But that kind of uncomfortable laughter has been something that I've struggled with. How many of you struggle with that versus I know other people who struggle with the inability to prevent themselves from crying in certain situations? I don't mean like tearing up in a movie, but like crying at a time where they really don't want to cry. How many of you have had that happen with laughter? And how many of you have had that happen with crying? And how many of you have had that happen with both? Okay, I'm going to say hello, bring in some of your great comments. Knowing it's a bad time makes it worse, like trying not to cough. Oh, absolutely. For me, it does. For me, it does, because otherwise I would just laugh out loud. So anytime you're stifling it like this, forget about it. I mean, I'm just toast. I can't do it. And then let's see what we have here. Let's see. Hey, welcome, Shivam. Okay, from India. Welcome, welcome. And then it says, I'd love to see that. Hello, Pam from Crowley, Texas. All right. How many of you, when you think about it, I'm going to take this off so we have more room for our comments. Okay, perfect. So when you think about what you can't control, do you think more laughing or crying? All right. Once I get started, I have a problem controlling my laughter, or I always have. Have you ever woken yourself up laughing? How many of you have literally been deep asleep and woken yourself up laughing? I'll speak for myself. I don't know if everyone has done that. Some of the things that we do, I wonder if everyone does it or if it's me or a subset. But how many of you have woken yourself up laughing? All right, I can say I have woken myself up laughing more times than I can count. But there is, and I want to prove to you that certain kind of laughing is no more under our control than certain kinds of crying or other forms of emotion. All right? All right. So Alexis from Portland, Oregon, it happens all the time in school as a kid, laughing. I know, and I kind of thought I would grow out of it, but it's just not, it's something that I struggle with. Never. So Matthew has never woken yourself up laughing. John has never woken yourself up laughing. Okay, I have woken myself up laughing more times than I can tell you. So that makes me feel I find it hard to laugh once I've woken up. Yeah, but you mean I'm talking about like, ha ha ha, and the noise has woken me up from the middle of a dream. So Servan says sometimes. Okay, I guess it's not as common. Maybe that's why I have an affliction and I'm not able to prevent myself from laughing. So cut me some slack, right? So Pam says, I haven't woke up laughing, but that sounds a fun way to start the day. It is kind of, but then you have to wake up. Then I have to wake up my husband and tell him about the joke. And invariably, just like when you dissect a joke, dissecting a dream isn't as interesting as it seems. All right. But, and it's not, and by the way, it's not always the start of the day. Sometimes it's like 3 o'clock in the morning. So there's that. But that happens all the time. I want to tell you a story about a naval student flying in formation. It was a high pressure maneuver. He was trying to get his Top Gun status. But suddenly he started laughing hysterically, and he was laughing so hard that he endangered the flight. And this wasn't the first time this man had broken out in uncontrollable laughter at seemingly strange moments. This young pilot had been waking up other members of his household in the middle of the night as sound asleep. He broke out in peals of laughter. Okay, so maybe I have a disease. All right. Here's the deal. It turns out that this pilot, who showed no other symptoms when documented with the problem, this was back in 1997, he was experiencing a rare form of an epileptic episode called gelastic seizure. The main symptom of a gelastic seizure is uncontrollable laughter. So maybe when we're looking at criticizing people for laughing at things inappropriately, one of the first things to do is separate out, is this the from the I can't help it laughter. So Alexa says lack of oxygen. That's a good point, but maybe there's a lack of oxygen when I'm sleeping, but I break out into I laugh easily. I have to admit, I'm someone who laughs very easily. Are you actually? That's a good question. How many of you think that you laugh more easily than average or less easily? Some people it takes a lot to make them laugh, and some people like me laugh at all the time, even at myself, the ridiculous things I do throughout the day, not even intentionally. Laughing and crying at inappropriate moments or out of context to one circumstance, crying in the middle of a lecture, for example, or at a funeral, is something many of us have experienced at least once. It doesn't mean you necessarily laughed at a funeral, but we've all laughed at inappropriate times. Not all of us, maybe, but a lot of us. I'll speak for myself. And there can be, in addition to the gelastic seizure, there can be a variety of underlying causes for these ill-timed outbursts. Not all diseases, but some diseases like multiple sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, anything that involves the brain and lesions in the brain can result in pathological crying or laughter. And this is sometimes called emotional expression disorder. So maybe I have a disorder. All right, so let's see what you say. Okay, so Matthew says less easily. John says probably a little above average. Average. Alexa says more easily. Sometimes I'm the only one laughing in Teams meetings. Okay, so I'm with you, Ray, but I totally get it. All good belly laughs is an absolute daily requirement, along with learning something new every day. How do you have a belly laugh? I don't feel like I can control it. The only way I can control my laughter, actually, is if I start with that chuckle laughter, like, and then it moves over, or it gets contagious with someone else, and then it turns into the non-volitional laughter. So maybe that is a way. Maybe we could all benefit, I don't know, from learning to create that non-volitional laughter. Okay, Hasham says average. Shivam says average. Stephen says very much depends on who I'm with. Some people make you laugh easily. Some suck the joy out of life. Okay, I get it. Absolutely. And some people who make you laugh are the ones who suck the joy out of life because it's so funny. At least that's for me. All right, Cleveland Clinic researchers are even testing an experimental treatment, a combination of two drugs to help control involuntary outbursts. However, involuntary emotional expression disorder turns out to be something of a misnomer. In fact, true laughter and crying are never voluntary. Now, you can have crying and laughter that is volitional, that you can control, but it seems to be associated with a completely different part of your brain. Now, again, neuroscience, we're in its infancy, so these things have to be taken with a grain of salt, but it's good to think about. It's a way to think about cutting people some slack if they're laughing at things that may be inappropriate. And this does remind me, back in the 80s, shortly after Ronald Reagan was shot, James Brady, who had been in his circle, was shot. And I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time and working with a population, and they were going to a therapeutic equestrian, like a horse place. And this was supposed to be therapeutic. And James Brady was there. And it was very odd. He was at this point in a wheelchair. I think the bullet had entered his brain. But he had no control over his emotions. So you'd be talking to him 1 minute and he would just break out into crying for no apparent reason. And this experience way back in probably 85, 86, this experience really gave me more empathy toward people who are unable to control their emotions. Now, there's all kinds of communicating with emotions that is controllable, but I'm talking about this particular thing. So Juanita says, everyone has a different sense of humor, I think. Yes. Oh, good. Great segue. Thank you for that. Because first I want to kind of talk about what makes this idea of laughter and share a couple of interesting things. And then I want to talk about what makes something funny. What makes something funny? And is there an underlying universal understanding of what makes something funny? And as it turns out, going all the way back to Aristotle, the short answer is no. But we're going to dissect some things and see what you think. Okay, for the last 10 minutes. But I do want to tell you about two things that are one thing that happened back in 1962 and one thing that is happening right now in terms of contagious behavior, contagious emotions. Okay, so there is this amazing tale of this incident that took place in what is now Tanzania. A group of schoolgirls began laughing, and the other girls saw and heard their laughter and started laughing. And soon the entire school was giggling uncontrollably. Okay, that doesn't sound so interesting, but it was so much that the school had to be dismissed. And the uncontrollable, contagious laughter went on for 6 months. 6 months. You think, what? Yes. So I was thinking about this when I read about a TikTok phenomenon where there are seemingly involuntary responses to people who watch TikTok influencers exhibit certain behaviors like laughter. They've even done with TikTok influencers exhibiting Tourette's-like symptoms, tics and outbursts that would normally be associated with Tourette's, and actually seeing the spread of these kinds of behaviors to a lot of young girls and young boys in middle school and in high school exhibiting these Tourette's-like behaviors. Same with laughter. So we know that there are a lot of emotional, crazy kinds of things going on in our brain. And I say crazy in terms of like, we just don't understand them, where things are contagious. We think we have control over them and we don't. All right. So let's get some of the comments in. So Ray says, the uncontrollable laughter reminds me of Dabrowski's theory of overexcitability. Oh, thank you for that. Don't know it. Gonna check it out. Ray's always such a great source of good thinking stuff. Alexis says, my sister-in-law will laugh hysterically if someone falls or hurts themselves in a physical way. I've always chalked this up to a lack of empathy. Turns out, no. A lack of empathy may be exactly what makes us chalk this up to a lack of empathy. And I don't mean this as a criticism. It means like we cannot be empathetic for things that we think people should be able to control, or it's harder to be empathetic, I should say. But there is a reason that your sister-in-law might not be choosing to laugh hysterically at this. And this gets into what makes something funny. All right. So before we get into that, I want to tell you one story that will help you give a little bit more empathy to comedians, because comedians are between a rock and a hard space. A research study was done where they hooked up professional comedians and then regular people hooked them up to an fMRI, a functional MRI machine. And they were required to, I think they gave a New Yorker cartoon with no caption. And they were required to come up in 15 seconds with a caption to this New Yorker cartoon. And then they kind of saw what part of the brain at least had, blood flow to the brain to the extent that that's correlated with, brain activity. What did they find? Anyone want to take a stab? What they found was different between what professional comedians, the difference between professional comedians and regular people, like, regular people, was that with regular people, the prefrontal cortex, the executive function part of the brain, came alive. But in comedians, part of the brain where we make more connections. So they weren't relying on these executive functions. It had become more, maybe one could argue, more innate to professional comedians. So if we are holding professional comedians up to these standards, it could be that requiring them to think about all the ways that they could be offensive and all the ways that they couldn't be offensive, which is a good thing to do. I mean, we don't want to be offensive, but it could prevent comedians from doing what they do, from making the jokes and being natural, because they're not using that part of the brain, which is perhaps why this concept called clafter, or I think it's clafter. Is it clafter? Clafter, something like this. It's a combination of clapping and laughter. And a lot of comedians now use this as a way to get response that's safer than making jokes. So they'll say, parenthood, am I right? And the audience will clap, 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 clap. Now they may take something more divisive. They might say, Donald Trump, am I right? And then they'll know that that audience is with them, and they know kind of where they can go with their jokes. But this is not a form of humor. And increasingly we're seeing comedians use this as a way to say, okay, what can I talk about? Is this going to be an entree for me to be able to say these things? Or if people don't clap, then they can take it another way. All right. So let's get some comments in here. Deepak, watching Laurel and Hardy makes me laugh loudly and is quite a stress reliever at the end of a hard day's work. Okay, so Laurel and Hardy stands up, kind of slapstick, and we're going to get to the elements of what makes humor in the last 5 minutes of the show. Look at fail videos all over social media. People hurting, watching people hurt makes many people laugh, which makes me worry about the human race. Okay, but when you think, oh, clapter. Thank you, Stephen. Stephen says clapter. That's what I meant. I was not clapping. It's clapter. I knew it was wrong. It's clapter. That's what it is. When you're clapping, ha, 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 but it really is nothing to do. It's signaling. I guess it's closer to a chuckle, but it's not laughter. All right. Fantastic. All right. Let's get into what the theories of what makes something funny. All right. Why do we laugh and derive amusement for so many things, from puns to pratfalls? Why are some things funny to some people and not to others? And how is it that a successful joke can cause pleasure, but a gag gone awry can cause so much pain? And these have been much more, the ideas of humor have been much more confusing to people than other emotional experiences. So most scholars agree that anger occurs when something bad happens to you and you blame someone else. Okay, that's easy. Guilt occurs when something bad happens to someone else and you blame yourself. But humor, throughout the ages, there have been no universally agreed upon theories of humor. Now, Aristotle and Plato introduced a very popular concept called superiority theory, the idea that people laugh at the misfortunes of others. That's, can you punch up or you can punch down? How many of you think that that's a solid theory? That it covers a large amount of what we think is funny, that you can think we laugh at the misfortunes of others. But this premise doesn't seem to work for things like knock-knock jokes, which are probably not that funny, but sometimes they are, and they're funny to little kids. Knock, knock, who's there? Boo, boo, hoo, ha, ha, ha. Maybe they are to some people and to some adults, or when you hear it for the first time. Sigmund Freud had a different theory, and it makes more sense. His was a relief theory, the concept that humor is a way for people to release psychological tension, overcome their inhibitions, and reveal their suppressed fears and desires. What do you think about that? Clap for. Teresa says clap for. All right. What do you think about that? What do you think? What would you agree with more? Relief theory or superiority theory? Or do you want to wait for the last one? And this is one that seems to have the most traction. And this is called incongruity theory. And this is the one that a lot of people think, which is this idea that humor arises when there is inconsistency between what people expect to happen and what actually happens. And that is one of the reasons why people laugh at someone falling or something happening. They think this shouldn't happen, and then this happens. So it's not so much superiority theory or relief theory in this particular case, but incongruity theory. So what do you think about that? So it works well with punchlines. But scientists have also found that in comedy, unexpectedness is overrated. So not all research has found that unexpectedness or incongruity results in laughter. There's another theory, which is the benign violation theory. And this came from McGraw and Warren's work. This idea that humor arises when something seems wrong or threatening, but at the same time is really okay or safe. So violations of personal dignity, slapstick, physical deformities, these kinds of things. People laugh at this stuff, whether they should or shouldn't. Sometimes it could be under their control and sometimes it might not. Personal, sort of linguistic norms, unusual accents, malapropos. So those kinds of things, social norms, eating from a sterile bedpan, for example, or strange behaviors, and even disrespectful behaviors, all of which have comic potential provided they don't seem threatening. So what do you think about that theory? Let's get some more comments in. Alexis says, Hashemi, isn't it different being there when someone gets hurt versus watching it from a distance? Yes, that's a really good point, Alexis. We laugh at the unexpected like an unexpected twist. Okay, so you're supporting the theory. What was the title? I was joining. The title, Kabedi. Sorry, I'm really bad when it's scrolling fast to catch her name. But the title is Humor and Laughter. What makes something funny? Sounds right. I agree. Physically being there makes it worse. Today's topic is what makes something funny. Thank you. Okay. Benign violation. Thank you for that, Becky. All right. All I can say to leave you today with how to think is a joke can fail in one of two ways. It can be benign and therefore boring, or it can be too much of a violation. Even for people who think that violation, you can go way crazy with violation and it makes you laugh, but it can be too much of a violation and therefore be offensive. For a joke to be funny, it has to land in that sweet spot between two extremes. And that landing depends upon the specific sweet spot between the two ears that are taking in the information. And the research is really interesting, but we're going to leave it. We don't want to go over. We've gone 1 minute over. So I'll leave you with a couple of questions. Can you imagine that AI could actually reveal what makes us laugh uncontrollably? AI can assess and determine what can make each person laugh uncontrollably. Is it fair to judge people by what makes them cry? Is it fair to judge people by what makes them cry? Is it fair to judge people by what makes them laugh? We all have opinions about what should or shouldn't make us laugh, but maybe we should be more cautious or curious about our biological responses to humor, the true nature of humor, and the biological role humans play for all of us humans. The biological role that humor plays for all of us. Have a great week. See you next Monday. And if you're joining late, let us know in the comments who you are and where you're from, and join in the conversation. I hope that we can continue to grow this group of good thinkers. So we all need a little bit of time away from what to think to devote more time to how to think.